I think we have heard enough of Benedict Johnson in Chicago, or have we? You know, a report came out the other day when Dennis Allen met with media and said exactly when Ben Johnson had reached out to him to talk about potential job opportunities in Chicago. Now, we know as Lions fans that really kind of burned our butts a little bit because here we are in an epic run going into the playoffs of the 1 seed, and this SOB is out communicating with other people about job opportunities that he hasn't even himself secured, or has he? And so before I get into all this, I want to tell you that this idea of illegal tampering by the Bears or Ben Johnson or both could be legit. Is the NFL picking it up? Have they thought about picking it up? Has anyone looked into it? Has anyone proffered the idea of illegal tampering? Because it does exist for coaches, and there is a very specific set of rules that goes in line with this, and I have dug into it, and I have it for you, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But first and foremost, I think I want to let Dennis Allen kind of put Ben on the burning stake here with what he had said about when Ben Johnson had reached out to him.
Hey, Dennis, how are you? Welcome to Chicago.
Yeah, man, I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well. First and foremost, wanted to get a feel for how you and Ben got connected. He kind of alluded last week that you guys hadn't really met before any of this started. So what was the initial connection?
Yeah, I think at some point, as we got later in the season, he reached out to me just to see if I would be interested. I told him that I would be interested. I think it's probably, a product of just the same connections. Dan, Aaron, all of us were at A&M together at some point in time, or had that connection. We're all on the staff there in New Orleans together. I was with Terrell Williams. He was with me in Oakland. And so I just feel like I had connections to Ben, although I didn't really know him. And I just think him leaning on those guys in reference to me, and me leaning on those guys in reference to him, I think we both felt like it was a really good fit.
So my first question would be this. You didn't really know Ben. Well, you didn't, period. So you just said. If you had no relationship to Ben prior to this, well, then clearly there was conversations that must have been had. So I guess the second part of this is the report that dropped a couple of days ago. And, a lot of us Lions fans, and, I'll try to cover this as unbiased as I can, but it's hard. Watching what really turned out, in the final game of the season against the Washington Commanders, it just felt like he shit the bed. He completely didn't call a very typical game for Ben Johnson. It just seemed very awkward. Frustration really kicked in, during that matchup. All of us just kind of wondered, what in the hell are we doing? Running the ball would have been the key thing to do there in 3rd and 1, not trying to pass the ball. And there was so many other things going on in that game that just didn't seem right. And Ben Johnson, the fact that a report drops that you contacted Dennis Allen in November? In November, you contacted Dennis Allen to talk about potentials of taking an opportunity with him depending on where he ended up. So just a few weeks into the new role here, as head coach of the Bears, Johnson, he hired former New Orleans coach Dennis Allen, right? And he hired him as a defensive coordinator. Now, at first thought, Allen would become the Lions defensive coordinator is what we would have thought, but some reports surfaced earlier that he was a favorite in Chicago. And the Lions ended up promoting linebackers coach Kelvin Shepard. So here's what I would say to that. If Ben Johnson was out there laying the groundwork prior to being hired by the Bears, was he instructed to do that by the Bears? Hey, go build your team during the season. While you're having this amazing run, go build your team so we're ready to go here in Chicago when you come to work for us. Come on, crazier things have happened in this world. An assistant coach completely sniping coaches and going around and having conversations, maybe even including players. Something doesn't sit well with me with this. But the fact that Dennis Allen wasn't even fired until the end of November, you would have had to have contacted Dennis Allen after he was fired, according to the rule book. How could that have happened? I'm just wondering how that could have happened. Doesn't seem to make any sense to me that he contacted Dennis Allen in November, but he was fired in November. And again, I'll let the rule book explain some of that, but I want to point something else out to you guys. You remember the game. Chicago's at Ford Field. When there's 32 seconds left on the clock, and Caleb Williams gets one playoff? One play. Didn't that seem a little bit orchestrated? I said right after that game how weird it was in the post game, how that just really didn't seem right, and how that ended up getting Eberflus fired. I mean, imagine just for a moment that Ben Johnson had a conversation with Caleb Williams at some point and said, hey, I would love to be the head coach of Chicago. I bet you would love to have this really cool offense. Hey, if we ever get into a situation in Detroit and we kind of need you guys to lose, you're having a bad season anyway, doesn't help you. Like, you're not going anywhere, Caleb, but, your coach could be on the way out. And then, hey, I could usher in this cool, new offense. And, hey, maybe we win the North next year and go to the Super Bowl. What do you think about that? So if we get into a late game situation, just remember we had this conversation. Who the hell blows 32 seconds in the NFL and runs one play? Now, you could put that on the coach because he didn't use a timeout, which he should have. But beyond the 21-second mark, you can forget about it. It's too late. So something doesn't sit well with me. That's why I decided to finally do this. All right, so we know that Ben Johnson contacted Dennis Allen in November, per some reports. So allegedly, that's when it happened. So now I'm going to switch over to the rules. The NFL anti-tampering policy. And I am going to read the part about the head coaches because it does play a role here. And here's what it says. It says head coaches. You have to be fired. You can't be under contract. So no head coach may discuss or accept employment for the current or the future season with another club in the league. No club may request permission to discuss employment with a head coach for the current or the future season. And number 3, no employer club may grant another club permission to discuss employment with its head coach for the current or a future season. The prohibition in number 1 above, which is no head coach may discuss or accept employment for the current or a future season with another club, also applies in the offseason unless the coach's contract has expired or has been terminated, or his club has granted him permission to explore other employment opportunities, or his club has granted another club the opportunity to contact him. Now, in the offseason, no club is obligated to grant another club permission to discuss employment with its head coach if the head coach is under contract, provided, however, that a head coach may negotiate into his contract a right of such off-season permission. Clubs may negotiate a right of first refusal into a head coach's contract. Now, expired contracts, which would have been Dennis Allen, fired, terminated, expired, same thing. If the contract of the head coach has expired or thus, terminated, the employer club must not deny the coach an opportunity to discuss or accept employment with another club. Protocol. Any contacts by a club seeking to employ a head coach, either with the employer club of the person sought or directly with the club employee sought or his representative, are subject to the provisions of the section on protocol, page 5. Similarly, contacts by club employees seeking head coaching jobs with other clubs are subject to the provisions of the section on protocol. Let me say that again. Contacts by club employees. Ben Johnson's an employee, right? He's not a head coach. He's not an assistant coach. He's an offensive coordinator. He's an employee. Contacts of any kind concerning the future employment of a head coach with a club other than his employer club are prohibited. But then we go on to the next part, assistant coaches. Okay? Under contract during season. During a club's playing season, including postseason if applicable, excluding the Pro Bowl, the following actions are prohibited concerning an assistant coach who is under contract, unless the involved coach has been dismissed by his club. Ben Johnson was under contract. Ben Johnson was not dismissed. Ben Johnson was on the sideline coaching. No assistant coach may discuss or accept employment for the current or a future season with another club in the league. To me, that's very clear. He may not discuss or accept employment for a current or a future season with another club. Now, you could also, any good lawyer could turn this into and say, well, that means you can't discuss things with other people in the league because you aren't even hired by this other club. 2, no club directly or through an intermediary, was Ben Johnson the intermediary, may request permission to discuss employment with an assistant coach for the current or a future season. Number 3, no employer club may grant another club permission to discuss employment with one of its assistant coaches for the current or a future season. This prohibition applies to employment with another club in any capacity. Let me say that again. This prohibition applies to employment with another club in any capacity. including head coach, except for the postseason procedure described in paragraph 2 below. Under contract after season. If an assistant coach's playing season, including postseason, if applicable, excluding Pro Bowl, is over and he is under contract to his club for the succeeding season or seasons, one of the provisions below, head coaching opportunity or lateral move, whichever is applicable, must be observed. There are 2 tiers for coaching staffs, head coach and all assistant coaches. Ben Johnson's an assistant coach, but you know what I was saying by that he wasn't the head coach. Assistant head coach is what I meant. So head coaching opportunity. If a club is interested in discussing its head coach position with an assistant coach whose playing season, excluding the Pro Bowl, is over and who is contractually obligated to another club, which Ben Johnson was, the assistant coach's employer club must permit the coach the opportunity to discuss and possibly accept such employment through March 1st of any year. After March 1st, the employer club is under no obligation to grant such permission. So obviously the Lions gave Ben Johnson permission, but it may be voluntarily granted at the employer club's discretion during the offseason. The following postseason procedure applies. Not that we really care about that, but anyway, if a club, the inquiring club, is interested in discussing its vacant head coaching position with an assistant coach whose employer club is participating in the playoffs, A, the owner or operating head of the inquiring club may contact the owner or operating head of the employer club to request written permission, which they must have done. The Lions must have given permission. Or B, if the employer club elects to grant permission to the inquiring club, which would have been the Bears, the one interview between the inquiring club and the assistant coach must be conducted at a location acceptable by the employer. We know the rest of the rules for this, right? You can't do it, but through Zoom for the first opportunity, and then it can be in person after that. So no contact or no contract shall be executed, and no agreement to execute a contract or an announcement of a contract or of an agreement for employment shall be permitted until after the conclusion of the employer club's playing season. If a club elects to grant permission to one of its assistant coaches to interview for a head coaching position, it must grant permission to the inquiring clubs. Now, here's where I'm going with this. At the end of the day, Ben Johnson was under contract, right? And you're telling me that during the season, he's contacting other coaches in the league. Under contract, not under contract, terminated, doesn't matter. According to this rule, in this whole anti-tampering policy, Ben Johnson should not have been allowed to contact anybody in the building or outside of the building about building his team to go to Chicago or anywhere else in the league. It's very clear in here. Clear as mud, but it's clear that if you are under contract, you should not be discussing any of this, right? You're not even under contract with your new team yet. So how are you going to go build your team of teams while you're under contract? When your season is over, then that's at a different stage, right? I mean, when you lose to Washington, your season is effectively over. And Ben Johnson was in Chicago 24 hours later. It just stinks to high heaven. Something doesn't make sense here. And Dennis Allen sold this dude out by telling him that Ben contacted him during the season. He didn't say after the season. He didn't say, at 8:59 p.m. on Sunday night after the Commanders game. He said during the end of the season or at the end of the season. But what he really meant to say was in November when he was fired by the Saints, which again, according to this, should meet the threshold for illegal tampering. What's going to happen next? Is anyone going to pick this up and do more with it? Maybe, maybe not. Does it even matter at this point? Do I even care what happens to Ben Johnson? I really don't. But here's the thing for me is it just seems like Ben was checked out. It seems like Aaron was checked out to a lesser degree, but he was checked out. I just think that Aaron was way over aggressive in a game that they didn't need to be aggressive in. Clearly, other teams showed us how to beat the Commanders, which was exactly what I expected the Lions would have done had they not gone after Jaden Daniels with 55% of blitzes. That's neither here nor there. But what Ben Johnson did in this game, I mean, you've got JMO throwing a pass. You're not running it on 3rd and 1. You essentially have 2 downs to get a first down. It's early in the game. There's no need to press the gas right there. And you abandon the run when Jahmyr Gibbs is running all over the place. That makes no sense. Along with some of the other crazy, weird calls that he did that game. He was checked out. He knew where he was going. He already had his answers from his team of teams, the people that he was going to be bringing with him. Now, they went through the formality that week, right? They had these mock interviews with these guys. It was a done, foregone conclusion that these guys were going to be getting together. I think that there's illegal tampering here to a degree, even a lesser degree. And I think the NFL should investigate it. And whatever happens, happens. But cheaters never win, and you're not going to win against the Detroit Lions. We'll see you this fall, Benedict Johnson.
Detroit Lions.